Okay, hello. Wow, it's okay. Hold on. Let me. If you already aren't subscribed to the channel, I would very much appreciate your support in subscribing today because I would like to create more of these. Not a lot of people go through their thought process thoroughly or like in depth. What we're going to talk about is a third environment art study that I did. Okay, so the first thing I started to do was change the color of the background, and what I pretty much did was made it blue, the color of the sky. And so here we are going into the sketching phase. This is in San Francisco, California, if you've never been there, and this was one of the hills that I just took a photo from like the middle of the street. This is my attempt at recreating it, and so this was very hard for me because everything is a little bit skewed as it's on a hill. It looks like it's just a simple 1-point perspective, but at the same time there's just so many background and foreground elements. And so the parts that I struggled, the part that I'm working on right now is the value study, and I honestly figured out so much of the value just by laying it out in black and white and understanding where the light source is coming from. And so on the left side is the brightest white because that's the subject and the most intense lighting, and then the other parts it's a little bit less intense. So I tried to be more accurate and making sure that I tried to stay as close as I could to the original values that were in there. And so when I'm going in with all the different values for each of the cars. And let me be honest, I don't draw cars at all, and so this is my first time and I was struggling, but we still try to get it done. I tried to make sure that the cars were following the perspective lines. During most of this process in the beginning, I had never zoomed in. I was staying zoomed out just to keep myself from focusing on the minor details that wouldn't even be shown. And so here we are. I'm going in through like the buildings, trying to make sure that they're accurate to the color and values that I see in the reference. And so a lot of it I kind of struggled with a lot. I don't have a plugin for Photoshop where I can automatically create those lines and figure out if the lines on the building is accurate to following the vanishing point. Otherwise, I think I did a pretty good job. Here I am going in with all the windows. I'm gonna be honest, I don't draw a lot of windows either. And so here I am. We went through all the values for all parts of the reference, and so we're going in with the first color. It's like a neutral blue, and so here I'm going in with the yellow on the. What I was trying to do is figure out how bright and intense the colors are, because what I've learned from OrenjiKunArt is that you have to make the colors more dull and neutral for parts that aren't in the sunlight, because then that will bring out the intensity of the subject that is in the direct sunlight, and that will help it pop more. Because again, this is my first time actually putting in so much work to get as accurate as possible the values and the texture of the items, the subjects that I was drawing and focusing on. So I'm focusing on adding more details to the cars, and this part I did struggle with a lot, I'm going to be honest. Here I am going in with more details to like the road, and then switching over to the buildings on the sides. I got a stronger grasp of how they sort of react to lighting and trying to make it look believable. What I was trying to do is equally distribute details throughout the painting, because I feel that it's easy just to focus on this one part rather than each individual pieces, because constantly zooming out just to see it from a far point perspective will help me understand, like, is it reading well? Are the colors harmoniously reading well? Because I struggle a lot with getting caught up in the detail and then realizing that it doesn't even read clearly. The most detail that I've added and tried to figure out for this study was the details in the buildings, and so I tried to stay zoomed out, trying to make the buildings accurate, to make sure that the lines are going towards the vanishing point, because I'm constantly looking at the reference, and so making sure that it's as close as possible to the original colors. I was struggling a little bit because the size and scale wasn't fitting to what I was looking at from the reference and then my version, and I figured out that the width of the windows that I put or that I drew in my version were too big. So I was struggling, and so here I'm putting in the details on the farther building on the left that's like very dark. That building I struggle with a bit, but I figured out how to get the lighting right just so that it doesn't pop out as it's further in the distance. I wanted to mention that a bit of struggles that I went through were smoothing out the sharp edges. The sharp edges meaning, like, I'm trying to make sure that the lines looks intentional. But in all honesty, I think I did a pretty good job. My focus was to try to make everything read as accurately as possible to the original reference. Another part that I felt I struggled with was building up the study, and by that, try to equally distribute the amount of detail throughout the art, and I feel like I did a pretty good job with that, and so just trying to equally balance it all. And so here I'm going in with the trees, and to be honest, I think the size and scale, I struggled a little bit with the cars on the side and a little bit on the buildings. And so here I'm putting in a little bit more detail on, and so here I'm going in with the more details on the windows, just trying to add a bit more subtle, like, ambient lighting, I would say is the word. It's not like really a warm shadow, it's like a cold shadow, because the buildings were different. Some were a bit more yellow, some were a bit more like gray, blue, and so between the yellow, blue, and green, I kept switching around and trying to make sure that I equally distributed the detail as much as I could without trying to go too far into it. Like, it reads clearly in terms of value, color, lighting, and so the parts that I felt that were my strengths while working on this were the thumbnail sketch. The thumbnail sketch helped me to really lay it all out. That I felt pretty confident about. Not too confident, because I know that I can always improve. And another one that I felt like it was my strength while working on this study was intention, making sure that each part of the buildings, the trees, the roads, the cars felt intentional. The amount of detail and the accuracy of, like, size and scale that I spent putting in detail on each part of the illustration, because I can always improve, and I feel like I am always improving. And so I apologize if I am squinting. I can't see without my glasses as much, but I can see it. Another part that I felt confident with are the textured brush strokes, meaning like the texture in the buildings, making sure that it was like a solid line rather than just like scratches, unintentional scratches. Like, I want to make sure that it follows the perspective lines of the vanishing point in the picture and the texture in the trees as well as the road. because here with the texture of the road, I struggled a lot because I felt like the colors were not as vibrant as I wanted it to be, not as accurate as I wanted it to be either. Like, I struggled with that a little bit, but as I went on and tried to really go a little bit more saturated with the colors, it felt like it was coming together. And so when I'm working on this road, I felt pretty happy with the way it was progressing. Between the strengths and struggles that I dealt with in this environmental study, I felt that the color rough, this part helped me to figure out how to really just experiment and not worry about how clean the lines are, but rather how close and accurate the colors were to the original reference. And so I was going with more saturated blues, purples, and trying to figure out what worked together. And so I figured out that OrenjiKun explained it to me that if you go from diagonals from the highlights to the shadows, it helps to not have it like a monotone palette. I am adding more details to the trees because I felt like they could use a little bit more detail. And then here I'm adding detail to the metal post that's in front of that building, and so it's like a no parking pole, and that part I really felt confident with. I felt pretty happy with that result. I am okay with making mistakes. I am okay with it not looking good to some extent, but I also want it to look presentable. And so my focus, the ones that I wanted to bring to highlight, were understanding the light and color with how it affects the surrounding object, like the trees and the cars. And the essentials of environment would be nature, wildlife, and humans. Unfortunately, there's no humans in this one, but there are a lot of like buildings that people live in, and so it has to be believable that people would live inside these buildings. And so I feel like I captured that pretty well, and the importance of simplifying original subject for specific artistic design, such as cartoon animation. So what I mean by that, I mean trying to simplify the design of the trees and the buildings so that it could be used for like an animated TV show. And so I tried to simplify it so that it's not hyper realistic or photorealistic, but rather just you capture the important aspects of it, and that is the most important part. And so the last things I wanted to bring up was mistakes, and knowing that you're gonna make mistakes when you're working on these studies, because it's important to know how to improve on them on the next project. And that's why we don't spend too much time on these. It made me so frustrated at some points, but that's part of the art journey. And so I had a lot of fun with that. And that's crazy that I created this. Like, it's crazy. I'm gonna be honest, I can't believe that I created this. I bought the Master Series Perspective and Depth art book, which features OrenjiKunArt, and I read through briefly each step in his tutorial that he shared, with roughly 35 steps. Each one felt pretty significant, but I tried to narrow it down to 5. And so the ones that I want to highlight are intentions, color, rough, light source, duplicating columns, final refinements. So it looks like a photo. And this is my first actual attempt at creating a environmental study that I put more than just 3 hours into. The past 2 environmental arts has taken me less than 3 hours, and so you can clearly tell by the level of detail that I was willing to put in from the last 2 to this one. And I felt so confident that I have grown so much and learned so much from what I felt were the most important steps in OrenjiKunArt's tutorial and his section of the Master Series Perspective and Depth art book. and the intentions, color rough, light source, duplicating columns, and final refinements. We'll go into that right now. So I have the steps kind of like spark notes, like my own version of how I kind of explain each part. So the intention, thoroughly brainstorming the intention of how the lighting will affect the environment beyond the original reference field of view by looking for more images that will capture the appealing shapes, textures, and light. And so seeing the picture as a whole, knowing that you have to really put a lot of thought process into each section of the illustration, making sure that it reads well and that there's a purpose behind the way you set each step up, from the sketching to the value and the final result. Because knowing why things are set a specific way or done a specific way, that is when you know that there is meaning behind it, and it's not just there randomly. Placing objects or subjects randomly, it does not sell a believable world. Storytelling is important, and that's why intention is important, because things are not placed just randomly. Color rough would be keep it simple with the shapes to focus on the clarity and accuracy of the environment proportions, focusing on the overall readability through blocking out the shapes using similar color values. So that's where in the beginning I set the black and white values of the buildings, the roads, the cars, trees, and the sky, trying to figure out where the lightest sections are and the darkest sections, and understanding how the lighting affects the environment. And that's why doing like a black and white rough value before you actually go into it will help you figure out where the intense light is and where the darkest parts are. And that helped me a lot when we go into light source. And light source, explained in the book, is thoroughly understand the intention of the lighting and how it affects the environment consistently throughout the study process. Because between the two, the color rough is more focusing on the clarity and how it reads together, and then the light source is how it affects the environment. So like the building on the left is like very intense. It's like in direct sunlight, and so that's the most important part, because that is where the eye is led to. And then you start looking through the other side of the buildings, from the left side to the right side, and then down the road to the cars, because a lot of the details started going towards the cracks on the road, and that's where your eye is led to. Or intention constantly pops up in the art process, because you have to make sure that each part is reading clearly, regardless, even if it's the most minuscule subject. Like, even if it's in the distance, you just have to make sure that it reads clearly, otherwise it'll look random and the viewer will immediately point their eyes to it. And so that's where we go to duplicating columns. And the reason why I felt like it was important, even though it feels minuscule or just not important, the reason why I found it important is because as a kind of beginner artist going into like intermediate, a lot of my time is valuable, and so is yours. And so what I felt was needed was learning how to be smart with your time and being okay with duplicating items and making sure that they're placed correctly. Because if you have multiple metal poles in your street view, you want to make sure that you're managing your time well, and instead of drawing each individual pole, you want to copy and paste it, because that will just sort of help you speed up the process instead of like drawing each individual one. Because a lot of people, beginner artists, tend to draw every single hair strand rather than drawing, the shape of the head first. before going into the detail of the strands. And so that's why I felt that was important, and it's good to use the transform tool. Regardless if you feel like it makes you lazy, because it's not lazy. You're being resourceful and you're using the tool the way it's kind of meant to, or the way that it's not meant to, because experimenting in the program is important. And then that's where we come to the final one, where it's the final refinements. And Orenji explained it as carefully check throughout the illustration for any blank areas of interest and add a touch of detail to ensure it shows intention behind the brushstroke. And so that is why intention is important, because you have to make sure that no matter how detailed it is, you have to make sure that it reads the way you want it to. And that there's not just this, oh, this building hasn't been touched, oh, this looks empty. You just have to look closely, but honestly, just do what you can. And if you didn't get to a certain part of the building or part of the section of the environment and it looks empty, this is just a step in the art journey, and you're gonna be making more. And so that's why it's important to know when to stop and to also have fun with it, because people viewing your art will see you enjoying it. If you really do enjoy it, they will get that, because you put intention behind every part, from the trees to the subject, regardless of what it is in the environment, because it will make the illustration that much more special. And so that is it. Thank you so much for hanging out and listening. I'm sorry for this extra long talking video, but I just wanted to really explain how much thought process went to behind creating this image. And so I again want to thank OrenjiKunArt for motivating me to do more environmental art studies, because it's important to really put in time to these sorts of studies. I hope that you consider subscribing and give the video a thumbs up, because I really did enjoy creating this. And so if you enjoyed the final result, let me know. And I think that it's important to remember that we're humans and you are your own worst critic. And so that is why it's important to remember to have fun. I stream on Twitch. I stream art, occasional just dance, but you will mostly find me streaming art, because that's my passion, and I would like to try to get into the animation industry, because I have always been inspired by animation. Peace out, Girl Scout. Thank you so much for I don't even